Hello again. Now let's get ready for part two on our wow consecutive, or as old verbiage would say, the wow conversive. Now you'll remember that I said when you have the wow conversive, the wow consecutive prefixed to the cal imperfect, it will almost always be the wow pathic dogish forte. And that is one of the ways that you'll be able to distinguish the cal imperfect from a wow, from just a regular conjunction, which is the wow with the schwa. And we just call that a regular wow. That if you see a cal imperfect and it's prefixed with a wow schwa, then you know that that is just a regular conjunction, a regular wow, and should not be translated as a wow consecutive. So if you see the wow with the pathic dogish forte attached to the cal imperfect, then that's your clue that you're going to have a wow consecutive. Now, I told you in our last session that with the cal imperfect, you will never see a wow with a schwa prefixing it and being used as a wow consecutive, because that's just an indication it's a regular conjunction. But now that we're looking at the cal perfect, not the imperfect, but the cal perfect, that rule changes a little bit for us. Let's look at this. That's the imperfect. Imperfect. Okay, here we go. The cal perfect. And by the way, all of these charts that I'm showing you, I've posted those under lessons for our Hebrew class, and they're on PowerPoint, and you're able to download those if you want or print them up, but they're there if you want to review them. But most of this material is pretty much straight out of your textbook. So let's look at this wow consecutive. Let's start here on this side. Get a good view of it. There we go. The wow perfect without the cal perfect without the wow consecutive. We have Shemer and Zakar. Shamar and Zakar. And just he observed, he remembered. If we want to add a wow consecutive to that, this is how it's going to look with the cal perfect. Now remember, you're not going to see a wow with a schwa prefixing a cal imperfect and then translate it as a wow consecutive. The presence of the wow with a schwa when it's prefixed to a cal imperfect is indicative that that is just a regular wow and should be translated accordingly. Now with the cal perfect, this rule changes. If it's a cal perfect with a wow consecutive, you're going to see this wow with a schwa. With a schwa there. And he will observe, and he will remember. Wa shima wa zakar. The wa consecutive does not have the different spelling when it converts from the past to the present. When it converts from the past to the future. The primary purpose of the wa consecutive attached to a cal perfect is to narrate a sequence of actions. And this again is what the cal perfect is going to look like with a wow consecutive. Here we have an entire paradigm, and you'll note that all the letters in red indicate, and then your two accent marks on your 2MS and one CS, those are going to demarcate the changes. And just because we like to, or I like to have you guys practice pronunciation, let's pronounce the first few of these. Wakatel, Wakatala, Wakatalta, Wakatalt, Wakatalte. Now you should notice that the 3MP and 3FP are spelled with shirks instead of the schwas, the vocal schwa. When you have the wa and the schwa together, we refer to that as the vocal schwa. So it's spelled with the shirik instead of the vocal schwa. Now in the 2MS and the 1CS, the accent mark moves from the tet to the tov, and so instead of moving forward with the cal perfect, the wa consecutive on the cal perfect instead of drawing the accent toward itself, it pushes the accent away from itself. And so it's almost the mirrored opposite of what you would find with the Cal Imperfect. And again, there's no need to memorize this paradigm because it's just the vocal schwa, except for the 2MP and the 2FP where it's the Shurik. And that's pretty straightforward. Now, here's some uses of the while consecutive when it's used in the perfect. The future tense narrative sequence may begin with an imperfect verb followed by any number of consecutive perfect verbs. So even as long as it starts with an imperfect verb, then all future verbs that are in the while consecutive, they're going to be also translated in the future tense. Let's read this. 6 days you will labor and you will do your work. Now we have an imperfect followed by a perfect, but they're all translated in the you have a perfect followed by the imperfect, and they are all translated by the imperfect. Then you have the temporal or temporal modifier. It's the wahaya. And the temporal modifier, it's the Cal perfect third masculine singular from haya with the while consecutive. And it's going to mark the beginning of a future tense narrative sequence. And in that day, I will break the bow or bow of Israel. Now, this temporal modifier, in some of your more older translations, like the King James, maybe even the New King James, the New American Standard, the New American Standard Bible, and the American Standard Version, they're going to translate this temporal modifier as something like this: and it came to pass in that day, or it will come to pass in that day, I will break the bow of Israel. But all it's acting to do is to show that there's going to be a new narrative sequence. Now, the third use is the consecutive perfect may follow an imperative verb and carry the full force of the initial imperative. Now, you've not had imperatives yet, so I wouldn't expect you to be able to recognize this, but I just want you to tuck this information away in the back of your mind for the next couple of weeks until we get to the Cal imperative. Remember, an imperative is a command. Now, once a consecutive that begins with an imperative, it carries the full force of that imperative to all the consequence verbs that are prefixed with the Cal consecutive. Let's look at this. Stand, that's an imperative. You must stand in the gate of Yahweh's house, and you must proclaim there this word, and you must say, hear the word of Yahweh. And so all of these verbs that are prefixed with the while consecutive, they carry that imperative force of that first amad, stand, as an imperative, and it makes the other two verbs that are prefixed with the while consecutive, it makes them imperative as well. And it's basically you stand and you proclaim and you hear, and you say. And so that, we're just moving right along here. The next one is the while consecutive, and looking at those temporal or temporal modifiers once again. In Hebrew, this is wa yahi. It begins a new paragraph, typically in the past tense. It oftentimes marks the beginning of a narrative sequence. Then the Cal imperfect third masculine singular form with a wa consecutive, it marks the beginning of a past tense narrative sequence. And then here, wahayi, it begins a new paragraph with a future tense. You are going to need to know very carefully and completely these two modifiers, because you're going to see them a lot in your Hebrew translation work. Now, finally, in ending this while consecutive series, or part 2 and part last for the while consecutive, when you parse the while consecutive, and when you do this for me for your translation of Psalm 23, or for any of your quizzes or works, this is what your parsing is going to look like. You're going to need to indicate for me, like this first one, shamar, wa, ya, shamar. That is cal imperfect, third masculine singular with wow consecutive. And then here we have wazakar, cal imperfect, third masculine singular with wow consecutive. And he heard. And I'm sorry, and he remembered. So, two things that you need to be aware of. The verb form with a wow consecutive occurs frequently. That's very important. So you're going to need to be memorizing, looking, and familiarizing yourself. Number two, when you have a wow consecutive prefix to a cal perfect or to a cal imperfect, it changes the translation of that word. Instead of it being completed action, as imperfect, it'll be incomplete action. If it's incomplete action, then it'll be completed action. And that pretty much wraps it up. I just really recommend that you look over your book and be familiar with chapter 17 and just go back through it again and again until it makes sense and it's clear to you. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I should be back probably tomorrow with our section, or our beginning section, on what do we take on the cal imperative. There's the imperative, the cohortive, and the gessive. See you tomorrow.